rains and lots of other weather things happening. The grounds are in the best shape they've been in for all year long, I think. They look really good because we did have some rain. And we have a number of items on our program. The first thing I'd like to do is remind all of you who are on board. And I'm not sure that I'm without notes because I didn't know I was going to do this today. So I didn't come with notes, but Darren is our president. Darren, just say hello. And other members of the board are Iris and Val is way over there and under the tree. Val looks after a lot, as does Wally. And Roy Saturday is on the board. And let's see.
Petra.
Who am I missing?
Petra.
Petra is the web person, and I am on the board along with Denny, who's not here. He's off somewhere in the world traveling right now, so I'm standing in kind of for him. And so we're going to begin our program, and there are other members on the board whose names I haven't got right now and who may or may not be here. Anyway, we have some interesting speakers today. The Astle family, Marilyn Astle, and her siblings have put together a story about this area. And Marilyn's not going to be the speaker. Her brother Chris will be reading the words that mostly Marilyn wrote, but I think other members of the family may have written as well. And so she's going to do a little, or he is going to do a little story about this area. And so I'd like to introduce Chris. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to have a blessing first. And Sandra is going to, can you come up, or shall I bring the mic to you, Sandra? Thank you, Iris. Sandra Kastelic is going to try and kind of step back in here into the shade.
I need to say a few words about Sandra because she and I go back long ways. If you want to just sit here. Many years ago, in the 60s, way back in the 60s, Sandra and I were teaching at the high school here at the same time. And Nelson and I had a basement suite in our house, which is where Deep Creek is now. And she was our tenant. So, of course, we became very close friends. And it's amazing to me that she has devoted decades of volunteer work, her work with the church, just wonderful service to this community. So we're very pleased that she's going to give the blessing today as a lay person, but we certainly think you're well qualified. I'm going to sit, if you don't mind. Well, thanks to everyone who's made this day possible. To Cougar Wright for his foresightedness, the Lowry and Gull families who donated the land. It's still not enough. I know I need to use it. To Joyce McCormick for your coming today. To those who volunteer to keep everything looking so clean and beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful cemeteries that I've ever seen. To Iris Tufton, to her helpers, to Judy Reese, and to Marilyn, and to Chris. I think I taught Chris. long time ago. And to all of you who have chosen to attend this beautiful cemetery today for the blessing and the historical tribute. So welcome and good afternoon. So what is the cemetery? The last sleeping place of our friends and loved ones. First of all, we see the tombstones and read the names and dates, saying things like, how time flies. It doesn't seem that long since they passed. Or, I didn't realize how old or young they were. Quite often there's an inscription, perhaps biblical, or maybe descriptive, like life's work well done. There are little coincidences, like names of the same as someone in your life. I always couldn't get over Cecil Hansen. His middle name is Leroy, and that was my dad's name, Cecil Leroy. It just sticks with me. And I know you have examples like that in your mind as well. However, the most special moments come from within you, from how we interact with the deceased, and perhaps how we learn from being in their lives. We said, I can remember the big grins we shared when we said hello, when we saw each other. The phone calls when we saw the need to share and help pick each other up. The little secrets that we had and could laugh about, especially when we grew up. The ache of losing that person and learning to live without them in your life here on earth. Maybe you were lucky enough to be in a Bible study with them and explored ideas and beliefs without fear of being judged or laughed at. For each of these, and I know there are more that you could suggest, think of a thread of love being pulled out towards the central point. So just think of all your thoughts and bring them into the central point. Little known facts of life are also interesting, and often on days like this, as we walk through the graves together, we take the opportunity to tell these stories. Like the young man who went to enlist in the army, and he was told, you better go home, you've got a heart murmur, get ready to die. He lived to 93. The young teenager that came over from Europe with his parents and had to enlist a few years later and go back and fight against his childhood friends. Or we might say, he was our best man, or she was my sister, or he served on the hall board with me, or they are parents of my friends. And for each of these, pull another thread towards the central point. So in your mind, pull another thread, because your minds are going too, of all things that are meaningful for you. Most of these ideas are relatable and physical. Some of them are nuances of our soul. I took this opportunity to look up soul in the Webster's Dictionary. It says, an entity which is regarded as being the immortal or spiritual part of the person, and though having no physical or material reality, is credited with the functions of thinking and willing, and therefore determining all behavior. Another is the spiritual or emotional warmth, force, or evidence of this. Like a cold painting, we might say, it has no soul. Or some people seem cold and will say they must not have a soul. That's pretty judgmental, but it happens. Or they might stand as an example, such as Daniel Boone being the central figure or the soul of the frontier. We might speak of a town as being a town of 1,000 souls. Colloquially, soul has been used within the U.S. Black community as a sense of their pride and values. My grandmother used to say, upon my soul, as an expression of surprise. Then we have the spirit of a dead person, thought of as separate from the body and leading an essence of its own. That is what we are here for today, to bless all the souls who have been laid to rest. As we pull the threads all together, we'll do that in your mind.
threads together. From all of you, we can weave a fabric, making the tapestry of Sangudo, of who we are as a community, of those who worked before us, and of all our contributions now and in the future. We thank our God and Maker for life and for the lives of those who we honor and bless today. After the Lord's Prayer, we will sing a blessing song, and I invite you to join me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
Amen.
So the blessing song, a couple people I don't know it. I'm just going to invite you to stand and perhaps raise your hand towards the grave of your loved one while we sing this. So we'll sing it one time through, and then if you don't know it, you'll learn it. It's very simple. And so you can join us. Let's see if I can't sing it very well today. Okay. May the blessing
Of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Okay. May the blessings of the Lord
Be upon you. Bless you in the name of the Lord. May the blessings of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Well, thank you very much. That was very nice. Need help. Okay. Well, thank you, Sandra, very much. That was very inspiring to listen to. We will now have our speakers, collectively, the Astles.
I just want you to tip the mic so it's there.
Okay, gotcha. Collectively, the Astle family have put together information about us from their many years of having lived in this community. And Marilyn is the primary writer, and her brother Chris is going to be delivering his words to us. So Chris, if you could come up, and I will hand this off to you to.
Just make sure you don't have the mic out in front of the speaker pointed out.
Yeah, okay. You just step inside here. Okay, great.
So, my name is Chris Astle and grew up in the community, and I'm representing, I'm used to speaking on a mic, but usually it's on a stand and it's a little bit different. So I'm representing our family, of which three of my sisters are here, my sister-in-law, my niece, and there's others that wanted to be here but not able to be. My wife Barbara is here as well. So then I'm just going to follow through with this presentation of information that, as it mentioned, was written by my sister. So we are in the family of Ron and Betty, Ron Astle and Betty Galbraith Astle, and there were 7 of us children. We were born just down the road, about 2.5 miles down that way, as many of you may already know. So Ron and Betty, they both were born in Edmonton, growing up part of the time there and part of the time in the Sangudo area. So our grandfathers, who were the original ones, of course, to come into the area, were Jack Astle, and Barry Galbraith. They had homesteads in the area. Jack at Robertson Crossing, which is south of Rochford Bridge area, and Barry at Cosmo, which is north of Sangado. They both arrived in Alberta in 1912, separately of course. Barry was just off the boat from England and was joining two cousins that were already here, Ernie Kerr and George Kerr, and they all settled in the Cosmo area. Now Jack, he came by train from Nelson, Miramichi in New Brunswick. So Betty's ancestors, that's my mom Betty, they were from England, Scotland, and Wales, as were many of the earlier settlers in the country. My dad's ancestors were from England, Scotland, Norway, France, and they were quite a mixed group because they included even in the ancestral makeup refugees that were Huguenots who fled from persecution in France to England, Acadians who managed to survive the expulsion in the mid-1700s from the Maritimes, and a loyalist couple who settled in Quebec after the American Revolutionary War. So now to speak more directly of the grandparents on the Galbraith side, Barry and Nan. So grandfather Barry Galbraith taught school in Cosmo briefly when he was a young man in this country, and then he left to join the army in World War I. So he served his time in the army, and upon returning to his homestead in 1919, he brought a wife, Annie Lucy Whitehead. Now, we don't know what she was expecting, but she might have got something quite different that she was used to. She was known as Nan. She was from London, England. So Granny settled into her life here, and she became a part of the community where they lived down by the Pembina River. Granny wrote a bit in the Lantern era, which some of you may have that history book, about her early experiences. So Nan, as she was known, and Barry, they had 7 children, of which my mother was one, and Barry farmed until the 1930s, but we kind of suspect that he wasn't really that suited to farming. But I think it was a great adventure for him. So during the 1930s, he decamped to Edmonton to partner with another cousin, another Kerr cousin, by the Kerr family name, to operate what was called the Tuck Shop, adjacent to the University of Alberta. Some of you may even know of the Tuck Shop, and we've seen pictures of it ourselves, but that's about all. Our mother Betty thus started her education at the Garneau School, which still stands in Edmonton on the south side. However, the family didn't stay long in Edmonton, but returned to the farm, and mother continued her schooling in Cosmo. Barry, he then got a job as a poultry inspector for the government traveling Western Canada. So now, in our memories of Barry, our grandfather, he was a great gardener, and we know that he judged the poultry and garden produce at the local farm fairs, and probably have memories of being there when he was doing such. Pardon me, it's the breeze blowing things around. I think my wife asked if she could help me, and I think she can come and hold the mic. So getting back to the adventures of Barry and Nan, then their home, as I mentioned, was by the Pembina River. It was surrounded on 3 sides by the river, and we have wonderful memories as children of visiting them and often swimming in the river and playing by the river. So now going to the other side of the family, Jack Astle. In February of 1914, Jack married Lottie Christensen of St. John, New Brunswick. In November of that year, he applied for a homestead. Now, at that time, 1914, many young men were doing military service in World War I, but Jack, we understand that he may not have been called up because he had poor eyesight and didn't meet all the qualifications. So his first wife, Lottie, died in December of 1918, and family lore says that her death perhaps was due to the Spanish flu epidemic. They had no children at the time, so what was Jack to do? Well, he returned to New Brunswick and he married her sister and brought her out west. So upon returning to his homestead, he didn't stay long there. Him and his new wife, they moved to Merthorpe after selling the homestead, and he operated a livery barn in Merthorpe. Some of you know what that is, and if you don't, well, it would be a wagon and teams of horses, and he would transport goods, and he apparently even drove the local doctor on his rounds. Is it still coming out enough
Maybe a little
volume-wise?
closer, a little closer.
Okay, let's just kind of go there. Thank you. Okay. So, Lottie and her sister May both worked as harvest cooks, and they had likely come west on one of the harvest excursion trains that used to bring seasonal workers from the Maritimes to the prairies. And there's been lots written about those times and those trains. Hopefully many of you have been able to read those interesting stories. Jack's second marriage was not to be a long one either. Second wife May died in 1926, leaving 6 children under the age of 7. So what was Jack gonna do now? Well, Jack soon remarried. His new wife was Edna Traxler. Edna lived very near to here, just down the road. Her father, Herbert Traxler, owned the quarter section that later became our farm as Astle children. And that was the farm that my father bought when he returned from World War II. So growing up in Edmonton then, my father and his brothers and sisters, that was during the Great Depression. And you know, we've heard the stories that they faced difficult times in lots of ways, eh? So as young teens, my dad and his twin brother Al, they worked at a grocery store in the Gibson block on Jasper Avenue. Perhaps some being familiar, it's that triangular shaped building that still is there. So my father then, oh yes, pardon me, at some point the family moved out of Edmonton to the Traxler farm that's just down the road. So Dad once said that his father and or his stepmother, that when he thought about the fact that the war was coming, wanted to get his sons away from the city, and the thought of enlisting. However, both Ron and his brother, his twin brother Al, as well as his older brother, well, they just up and joined the Air Force anyways, as most young men were expected to do at that time. So Ron's mother had relatives in the Sandra area for a time, and there is a child's grave apparently in this cemetery for one of Ron's first cousins, Rose Ann Christensen, born in 1935 and died in 1936. Her parents, George Christensen was the father. He had been a returned World War I soldier. Now he was a brother to Jack's first 2 wives, Lottie and May. He brought his war bride from France, Teresa Torquay, and they lived in the area initially and later moved to Edmonton with their 5 children. So now getting to the to my family specifically, the family of Ron and Betty. So we have, as written by my sisters, a few stories about our parents' early times together. One being when my mom and dad met. Apparently my dad's younger brother Harvey says that he introduced them at a dance. But he was worried at the time that his own girlfriend Dot Kerr might find a man who had served in the Air Force more interesting than himself. But all was well. Harvey and Dot did marry about how they met comes from my dad's sister-in-law, Audrey. Audrey was married to my dad's twin brother, and she says that our parents met earlier than that. So Ron and Al enlisted together in the RCAF in 1942 and served together, but Al was sent home earlier, and I believe he got married shortly after he was sent home. And Audrey has told us that she brought my mother as a young woman along with her to a welcoming party for my dad, which was her husband's brother. He was returning from the war and arriving at the Sandra train station, and she feels that they probably met then. But then she said, well, I'm not sure, maybe they didn't notice each other, but that's probably the first time they saw each other. So another story was that during their courtship, Betty made Ron a birthday cake and walked with it from the Galbraith farm all the way to San Gudo, where Ron was working a distance of 7 or 8 miles. So, oh, how times have changed. So Betty and Ron were married in San Gudo United Church in June of 1948. Their honeymoon was a trip to Vancouver with several of Ron's family along for the journey. So most people didn't have cars or take trips then, so if there was any opportunity, I guess everybody was in. So they lived in Vancouver, my mom and dad, for 2 months, and while there, my dad, Ron, worked in house construction to actually have enough money to get back to Alberta. So when they get back, they settled on the quarter section south of here, the one we talked about, and my dad's brother, Alvin, and his wife, Audrey, were on the next farm south for some years, and until they moved elsewhere with their growing family. So my father, like his father, followed in the profession of carpentry, and he built many houses, barns, garages in the area. So Dad and his father Jack built the John Kennedy farmhouse and the Millhausen family home in Deep Creek. In Cosmo, those of the Schneer family, Bill and Meg Johnson. And my dad later worked on his own when he lived out here, along with Campbell McConaughey, as many of you probably knew him. So Ron, and probably Camel with him, built the Cypher House and Honey Barn. He built Larson's house, Alistair Barr's house in Stanger, Mrs. Metzger's house, Elsie Eichhorn's house, and one in Merithorpe, a home for the Sikoskis, which many of you might have known. So in the early 70s, a shortage of work locally necessitated a move for our family to Stony Plain, where my dad worked for Shaw Construction in the prefabrication shop for homes. And he also worked on the San Gudo United Church that was built probably, I guess, in the early 60s. And I believe Gladys Lowry apparently helped my dad do the joint filling in that building. So that's kind of an interesting fact for ones that are here. So after the 1956 fire that destroyed our family home, well, my dad built the house that still stands on that quarter section. And as a carpenter with a big family and not much money, he did quite a lot of making presents and building things for us when we were kids. We would often get presents that were whether maybe a barn with a set of animals to play farm, or the girls would get dolls' cradles and dolls' carriages that my dad had built. And that continued on to when we were adults, and he specialized in cutting boards, willow spoons, step stools, and I'm sure he built pieces of furniture for all of us at one time or another. Now my mom, Betty Galbraith, grew up on a farm surrounded by the Pembina River, and she loved country living. She had a large garden, and as kids we spent much time in that garden in the summer, as probably many of you older ones here did as well. We also can remember weeding the garden. We can remember the size of the potato patch. It was immense. I mean, as you think of it as a child, I think there was nothing that was quite as big as that potato patch with them weeds. So we also picked vegetables, shelled peas. Some of our best times were sitting around the kitchen, shelling peas and cutting up beans to go in the freezer, helping my mother in those kind of tasks. We picked berries. I can, in my memory, always remember a line of straggling children behind my mother going out to the berry patch, which was half a mile away. And we went out to pick them little tiny strawberries, which younger people here may have never seen those berries or realized how difficult it was to pick a jar or a basket full of them, yes. But all in fun, yeah? Right. Okay, so we also picked Saskatoons, blueberries, chokecherries, as well as had raspberries in the garden. So Mom and Dad also, they really beautified our home on the farm by planting many trees, and they loved growing things and gardening, which my mother passed on that love of gardening to many of her children as well. Now getting back to memories of perhaps harder times on the farm, but in a lot of ways very good times, of course. Many of our clothes when we were young were made by our mother, whether it was lovely dresses for the girls or knitting that she made, and that continued on into the time when she had grandchildren and did things for other children. Perhaps some of you can even remember that flour used to come in bags that you would save and make things out of it. We probably even had sheets on the bed that were made out of flour sacks. Now, young people probably couldn't really even believe that or understand that, right? So my dad, in being kept busy with carpentry, he wasn't specifically a farmer. We had a farm as a good place to live and a good place for kids to grow up. And yes, we did some work on the farm, but it wasn't a money-making business. We would often have animals. We had milk cows, we had goats at times. My dad didn't like pigs. I think we tried that a little bit once, and no, that's not for us, but we did have chickens. My mother loved chickens, and she had chickens for years, all the way up until the time when she passed away. And as a memory, as a young person, I can remember being out in the yard where we chopped wood, and I can remember holding down a chicken with one foot and cutting its head off with the axe, right? That was a necessity. And then bring that chicken in and soak it in water so we could pluck the feathers. And believe me, the meat today does not taste anywhere as good as that chicken that we had then, Okay, so Mom and Dad, as I mentioned, put a lot of hard work into the land and the area surrounding the house. It grew from a point of no trees or garden to what it was when they still lived there. So their focus was their family, and in later years, when they could afford it, they were able to do some traveling. A lot of the traveling, though, was to visit their children as we spread out around Alberta and various different provinces. So when we came driving up this morning and made the turn to come up here, that corner of the road, as children, well, we passed that corner every day, twice a day for school, riding on the bus. And we had a list here that my siblings made up of ones who were their school bus drivers for a period of 25 years or so. And we spoke earlier of Ralph Eichhorn. He certainly was our driver for many years. Pat Kerr, Chris Ritter, Bob Rolfe, Wally Wolfram, Don Schneer. And so just a few of the ones that drove us to school. Marilyn, my sister, recalls that when she started grade 1 in 1955, the first bus was a panel van with benches along the side. And maybe you older ones that went to school from here remember that. She said that the big kids on board were the Lowry kids. So, I mean, that just means that they were older than my sister was, right? And so we are blessed with Iris being here today. Yes. And Or she said yes, that the driver may have been Peter Keller, but she's not sure. Maybe some of you remember that he was the driver on the bus. But as far as other stories are concerned about the school bus, well, perhaps some of you here might remember what it was like in Sandra in the springtime when you were riding the bus or not. Because when the rains came, I don't think any gravel ever saw these roads out here. They got muddy real fast. And we know that it was just a short walk from the house, our house, to the bus. But then often in the spring, the bus could only get so far down the road. It might get stuck, and we would have to walk from there, or it might only go out to the main road that runs about whatever it is, 2 miles from here, the one that comes out from Sandra. It was well graveled at the time. The bus would maybe stop there, and kids would walk down to here, or it would stop down on the other end on the road that goes by our place, and we'd be able to get out and walk to the bus. Now, we would have rubber boots, but the thing would be that if you're familiar with the Sangado gumbo, how many of you are familiar with the Sangado gumbo? Right, now, young people, that's not a Disney character, but that is the mud that sticks to your boots, and if you get a little ways down the road, you can't walk anymore. The only option you have is taking those boots off and walking in your bare feet, because for some good reason it doesn't stick to your bare feet quite the same, and you can walk through there. But also, aside from walking, at times some of the kids that were riding the bus, they were able to take the tractor from the farm out from the muddy road to the main road, and they would be able to park the tractor if it was not being used at the road, and then get back to the home farm doing that. So it was quite an interesting adventure. So my sister Marilyn said that in the winter we could watch for the bus from our living room window, which looked west, and the bus would come from the west, and we would have to send one of the children out onto the road and down to the corner, which wasn't too far away, and be spotted by the bus, because if we didn't send somebody down, the bus wouldn't stop. So if you had somebody down there as the person that flagged the bus, then we would be sure we'd get our ride into school. And Marilyn says that long into her adult years, she dreamed about missing that school bus. So our parents supported our school activities and extracurricular ones, such as sports, Sunday school, Explorers, CGIT, Cubs, Scouts, 4-H, and we had also much extended family in the area, so we had a very rich upbringing in our association with our family members and with other members in the community. And I know for myself, thinking we didn't have lots of stuff, but we had lots of experiences, lots of friends, lots of loving relatives, and even role models in the community. And I must say that, as has been mentioned very briefly, 2 or 3 of my former teachers are here today, and it's quite a thrill for me to be able to see that. So my mother and father, they were very liberally minded people, in the sense that they accepted everybody as who they are, got along with everybody, and were friends with all people in the community. As they were very welcoming to our friends as children, whether it was when we were young or as adults. They taught us the value of hard work and many useful skills, such as gardening, woodworking, sewing, and multiple other things that really helped us to have a foundation in life that we could build on, and we probably passed a lot of those skills on to our own children. So none of us today as a family live in Sandra, but it certainly is nice to be here to represent our family, and hopefully get to visit with more of you folks, because there's probably a lot of you out there that I might have known in the past, and would welcome to be able to talk to or to chat with a little bit in this afternoon. So that being said, we encourage all of you to record and share the stories of your family, and perhaps we could hear some of them next year. So now we're going to pass this on to the next person. Are you going to introduce them, or should you want me to? Or? And thank you very much for putting up with me.
Lovely.
Yeah.
While we're having a little lull here,
Oh, this is your water, right?
I have to
It
point
is.
out that we're related. Did you know that?
We're related.
I knew it, but I forgot about it.
How are we related?
Well, Ron's twin brother Al,
Yes.
married to Audrey.
Well, you're related to you.
Audrey was a Ewer. We're shirt tail.
Yes.
And Audrey's.
Okay, cousin.
Oh.
Iris was my teacher in school briefly, yes.
Audrey's brother was Alan Ewer, and she was married to my mother's closest sister, closest in age, closest in heart. Her name was Donna.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. That was really enlightening, and I'm sure many people have memories of some of the things that you spoke about, particularly the mud. It's probably still around every now and again, even though there's pavement and there's gravel. But I'm pretty sure that mud can still kind of get you. The Sangoon mud is kind of famous. The family, Astle family, thank you very much for all the remembrances. And we have recorded this for the Sangoon Library, is it, Betty? Betty Thibbert is recording, and so I assume that that's for the Library Association's history or record of what we're doing here at the cemetery. Now I'm very happy to turn the mic over to Judy Reese Carbonell, who is going to speak to us on maybe family remembrances. I don't really know what she's going to speak to us about, but Judy, if you'd like to come up, you could take over this mic. Being welcomed by a puppy help.
Like it's an ice cream cone.
Thank you, Joyce. And thank you, Chris, for all the remembrances, because I lived in the area too. So, and I remember your parents very well, and your family. First of all, thank you to the cemetery board for arranging this day for all of us, and thanks to Bob and Millie, who always have the seasonal decorations and everything out. Where are the Charbonneaus, you're thinking? Well, they're on the south side of the driveway, and as of August the 25th this year, there are only 4 of that name here. But there's a story about the location. My grandfather, Victor Charbonneau, came from Port Coquitlam in BC and homesteaded in the Royal Valley on land you probably know as Lynn and John Hansen's. He came.
We're not hearing that.
Okay.
I'm gonna turn up the Can you hear me if I talk like this?
No,
They can hear me. They can hear me. I got it turned up.
He came to the area in 1913 with his wife Rosina and a 4-year-old stepson, Paul. The family grew with the birth of Jules in 1914, Alice in 1915, and Joe in 1919. The homestead records show that Victor went south to farm for at least 2 or 3 months, twice a year, leaving Rosina and 4 children on the homestead. And in those days, any and everything was news, and it was reported in the Edmonton Journal. Apparently, someone in the family, and I think it was my dad, because I think Uncle Paul was too old, climbed on a chair and took one of 2 guns down from the wall. It discharged, and unbelievably, that shot hit the hanging shotgun, which was also on the wall and loaded. Luckily, nobody was injured, but the paper reported Mr. Charbonneau was saying, "I didn't know the gun was loaded." Rosina spoke very little English, but still acted as a midwife in the area. Elizabeth Stuber told me that she was one of the babies delivered by Mrs. Charbonneau. My grandmother is even written about in one of Lillian Ross's first books. Which one? Which were the 3? Yeah. The Gentle Gambler.